Welcome to all of you to the AIISH webinar series on SIG Clinical Aphasiology. Today we have a brilliant speaker, our Chair Research and Education AIISH, Dr. Abhishek, and our very own EC, Dr. Gopee Krishnan, as a chairperson. I welcome you all to this brilliant webinar series, the first lecture to start from the June, in view of June Awareness Month. So we have Abhishek to start with a series of a scholarly session on demystifying lexical access in aphasia. Could I have chairperson to please introduce himself?
Thank you very much. First and foremost, let me all welcome our delegates this evening webinar on Aphasia. And I'm extremely happy to introduce our chair in AIISH on Dr. BP Abhishek, who is an assistant professor at AIISH. He has done his PhD, in my understanding, on lexical access in persons with aphasia. So I'm sure like this topic is quite close to his heart. So, and as you see here, I don't need to read about things. You can even read it yourself. But I'm sure like he's been there in AIISH, in my understanding, about more than 10 to 15 years or so. Sorry, Abhishek, if I'm mistaken, like please.
No, you're right, sir. You're right.
Yeah. And I've seen him, I've interacted with him so limited times, but I've seen his interest and curiosity in learning new things and trying out new things. I'm quite happy that yes, he has now joined this evening with us to demystify the lexical access deficits in persons with aphasia. So now, without no further ado, I think we will switch over to Dr. Abhishek BP. Yes, Abhishek, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you for the wonderful introduction, sir. I hope I'm heard. Yeah. If the screen sharing can be stopped.
Yes, Abhishek, you can go ahead.
Yeah. Right. Okay, I hope my screen is seen. Yeah. When this particular topic, when I chose this particular, when this topic was given rather, I didn't know where to start from because, I didn't know what the target group is because it's different each time when we have a presentation. Yeah. So each time when we have different topics, we have different target groups. So I didn't know where to start from because lexical access itself is like a huge topic. So I just thought I'll add some slides on the basics and then move on to lexical access in aphasia. Then we'll just try to demystify. That means to say that we'll just try to justify with the term. So yeah, we'll just start off. When you say lexical access, okay, it's the retrieval of the right word from the lexicon. When I say right word, so now I'm speaking, I have to have the right word chosen from my lexicon. And as you all know, lexicon itself comprises of, thousands or even millions of words. So from that, I'll have to choose the right word in order to convey my intent. The same way, you choose a particular word from the lexicon while speaking. So this particular process is called as lexical access. To be very simple here. And as far as the difference between lexical access and word recognition is concerned, they are usually used as synonyms, but they are not synonyms. So there's a subtle difference between the two. When you say lexical access, it's the term which is given for the search.
Abhishek, am I visible? Am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Can you just put that in PowerPoint slideshow mode, please?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Is it better now? Yeah.
Yeah.
I was just speaking regarding the difference between lexical access and word recognition. When you say lexical access and word recognition, that's a subtle difference between the two is what I said. When you say lexical access, it's like you'll have to search your lexicon among the thousands of words to retrieve a particular word. And when this is done, word recognition is achieved. That means to say that you can say that word recognition is the end product of lexical access. The process of searching the lexicon to get the right word is lexical access, whereas the word which you choose finally after the search is word recognition. So there is a difference between the two, where you can consider, where you can assume that word recognition is the end product of lexical access. Okay. As far as the models of lexical access are concerned, you have different models of lexical access. According to these models, the lexical access is a two-step process, three-step process, etc. There are, at least 8 to 9 models which are considered, which are well received models, which I'm saying. So there are so many models of lexical access. For my explanation, I've chosen the three-step activation model. So it has 3 steps listed here. That is conceptual semantic activation, lemma node activation, and retrieval of appropriate phonemes. As and when I move on, I'll be explaining each of the steps to you. So when you say, as you can see here, when you say semantic features, let's take a naming task. Suppose I show you a picture of a dog or something like that. So as soon as you see that, there are certain semantic features which should come to your mind. As in, it is an animal, it has 4 legs, it has fur on skin. All those semantic features would come to your mind, right? So, but dog is not the only animal which has 4 legs, which has fur on skin, and there are multiple things which may share the same semantic features. So this level, what you can see here, it is also called as lemma node activation or lexical node activation. So coinciding with the semantic features, many lexical nodes may be activated. So you'll have to shortlist or you'll have to activate one particular lexical node. That means to say that all these lexical nodes are put into computation, and one particular lexical node, would be chosen out of that, and then phoneme retrieval is taking place. When you say phoneme retrieval, it's like you have phonemes which is available in its raw form, and you will combine these phonemes in order to form the word. So whether it's cat or dog, whatever is the word, so you combine these phonemes, align them in a proper form, and you form a word. Right? So this slide gives you an explanation of what I said. When a person is asked to name a picture, the first step would be to recognize the picture. How do you recognize the picture? It's based on the conceptual or semantic features, right? So like, for example, if you say apple, so apple is represented by its shape, its color, etc. So that's the conceptual semantic feature which should help in activating the target. Right? But along with the target, there are other lexical nodes also which should get activated. That means to say that not only the target, but there are other lexical nodes which are called as competitor lexical nodes, which should be activated during the process. I hope I'm clear. So first you have a concept, going with the concept, there are multiple lexical nodes which are activated. So once these lexical nodes are activated, so that means to say that the activated conceptual representation would spread proportional activation to the lexical nodes. That is, as you saw in this particular picture, so there is there is a mapping which takes place between the semantic feature and your lexical node. And then what will happen is there is a process where one particular lexical node which corresponds with the concept is shortlisted. So this particular, this particular process is called as lexical activation. So when you say lexical activation, it's like one particular word out of the competitor lexical nodes is chosen or it is shortlisted. So this is called as lexical activation. So first you have conceptual activation, and based on the concept, multiple lexical nodes are activated. And one lexical node is one lexical node is shortlisted, and following this, phoneme retrieval takes place. So when you say phoneme retrieval, it's like the phonemes, as I said earlier, are available in its raw form. They're combined to form a word. Okay. As far as phonemic access or phonological access is concerned, again, there are 2 views. Okay. But the first view is called as discrete view, and the second one is called as cascaded view. What do you mean by discrete view? Is I told you that there is one lexical node which would win the process of computation, and which would win in the process of computation during the process of lexical activation, right? So when you say phonemes of that particular thing, like if you take the previous example, it was dog, right? Only the phonemes related to that particular lexical node is activated, then it's called as the discrete view. Whereas when you say cascaded view, opposite to this, you have something called as cascaded view. That is, phoneme retrieval is also taking place for the competitor nodes. For example, you had cat, right? So like words such as car, can, etc. also would be activated along with cat. So it's just not for the lexical node, which is the shortlisted or which is the activated lexical node, but even for the competitor lexical nodes, phoneme retrieval is taking place. That's what this particular concept believes in, right? So this is called as cascaded view of phoneme access. So to be precise, there are three things which I've told you. You have semantic features here, and then you have lexical nodes, and then you have phoneme segments. Okay, so based on your semantic features, lexical nodes would be shortlisted, and then the phonemes are retrieved. So based on how phonemes are retrieved, two processes are identified. I mean, there are two things which there are two things which I explained here. You have something called as discrete phonemic access, which tells you that phoneme retrieval is taking place only for the target word, and whereas you have cascaded, which tells you that phonemes are retrieved even for the competitor lexical nodes. So this is about the three-stage models of lexical access, right? So as far as the tasks used to assess lexical access are concerned, so you have naming task, which is the simplest task which is used to assess lexical access. Of course, the model which I told you right now, it's based on the naming task itself. So it's based on how the retrieval is taking place for the naming task. So in naming a task, again, you have different variants. You have confrontation naming, you have generative naming and all that. So in confrontation naming, what you do is you just have a line drawing, or you have a colored picture, or you have a real object also at times. You show this to the participant and you ask the participant to label that particular stimulus. So this is how confrontation naming operates. So why picture naming task is considered as an apt task used to assess lexical access is because it assesses for all the three steps of lexical access. So how visual recognition is taking place, how the lexical activation is taking place, and also how verbalization of that particular word is taking place. So all these three things are assessed through picture naming task. So that's why the picture naming task is considered as a gold standard task when it comes to the assessment of lexical access. Again, when you say generative naming or list generation, as you all know, what you do in the generative naming task is you tell the name of a lexical category and you ask the participant to come out with the lexical items, right? So here this operates on the top-down processing. So that means to say that it also taps your divergent mechanism of lexical retrieval is what they said. So that is, you specify the lexical category and then they will have to come out with the lexical items which should match with the category which you have said. That is, they'll have to come up with lexical nodes which should map with the conceptual features. So it's just the opposite of what the confrontation naming does. So you can have generative naming also as an alternate to assess lexical access. So you have confrontation naming and generative naming listed here. But in addition to this, you have some other tasks as well. Sorry. You have other tasks as well. You have something called as word definition task. Word definition task is where you tell a word and you ask the participant to define what the word is. So this again helps you to know how the mapping is taking place between the lemma node and the conceptual features. And you have open-ended questioning, as in you ask the color of sugar is or something like that, as in the responsive speech section of WAB. So even that can assess for word retrieval or lexical access. And one interesting task which is being listed here is the word association task. So when you say milk, you associate it with white, you associate it with protein, you associate it with energy. So that's called as association. So this word association task, can be carried out as an open-ended task also, or as a closed-ended task also. That means to say that you can give a judgment task to the participant to judge if the two given stimulus are related to each other or not related to each other. Or you can give a open word association task where you tell a target picture and the person has to come up with words which should associate with the target picture. So you can assess it both ways. So out of the tasks, to just give you a quick recap of what I've done so far. So I've just told you about what is lexical access. I've told you about the 3-step activation model for lexical access. And I've told you that, there are multiple tasks which can be used to assess lexical access, as in your confrontation naming, generative naming, word definition, association tasks. So this is regarding a few basic aspects. And when you say basic aspects, there is one more thing which I would like to bring it to your attention. So there are 2 mechanisms of lexical retrieval which are identified. One is called as facilitation and the other one is called as inhibition. So like I told you that during the process of lexical activation, multiple lexical nodes would be activated, right? So if one lexical node facilitates, if it helps to retrieve the other lexical nodes. See, like the concept of priming basically operates on this thing itself. So what do you do in a priming task? You present a stimulus, and before the stimulus, you present a prime, right? The prime can be semantically related to the target, or it can be phonemically related to the target. So it will trigger, or it will help you to activate the target first. So that's called as facilitation. That is when one lexical node facilitates the retrieval of the other lexical node. On the opposite, you have something called as inhibition, where one lexical node impedes the activation of the other lexical item, and it's called as inhibition. So you have a task called as cycling naming. So what do you do in a cycling naming task is you present all the pictures belonging to a particular lexical category. That is, you present all 10 animal pictures or 15 animal pictures, followed by words belonging to the other lexical category. So you see how much is the cumulative reaction time. So if one lexical, node is impeding the activation, if it's slowing the activation of the other lexical node, it's called as inhibition. So these are the 2 mechanisms of lexical retrieval, which is often researched. Okay. So now coming to the topic on how is lexical access in persons with aphasia. So how is lexical access in persons with aphasia? Of course, when you say aphasia, word finding difficulty is seen in almost all the variants of aphasia, though the severity would vary. So regardless of whatever variant you are speaking, there is word finding difficulties, right? So why is this word finding difficulty seen? So there is reduced access to the vocabulary, which is seen in most all the type of aphasia, which can result in this access deficit. So that means to say that, see, suppose I'm speaking about a person with anomic aphasia. So you say that a person with anomic aphasia is producing a paraphasic response, circumlocution, etc. I'll try to correlate the symptoms with failure in lexical access in my subsequent slides. But as of now, what I want you to understand is the word retrieval difficulties seen in persons with aphasia can be attributed to the problems in lexical activation, right? So I've just given an instance in the last 4 lines of this slide, saying that few persons with aphasia will be able to describe a given object, but they'll not be able to come up with a specific linguistic label. So this is because of the lexical access deficit what they have. So what I'll be trying to do here is I'll be trying to attribute the word finding difficulty to lexical access. We'll see where is the breakdown and how we can correlate the symptoms which is seen in persons with aphasia with failure in lexical access. We'll do that now. So when you say lexical access failure, that itself can occur at 2 levels. One is there can be problems at the level of the lemma activation. I've told you that there is something called lexical activation or lemma node activation, right? So there could be a problem at this level, or there could be a problem where this lemma nodes maps onto the phonemes. So there could be a disconnection between the lemma nodes or phonological forms. That could be one of the possibilities. And the other possibility is there could be a problem with the lexical activation. So these are the 2 possibilities which can result in a lexical access failure or lexical access deficit in persons with aphasia. So to just repeat, so there may be difficulties at 2 levels. The first level could be at could be at a particular level where the mapping between the conceptual features and lemma node activation is taking place. And the second possibility is that there could be a disconnection between the lemma node activation and its phoneme retrieval. So both these things are called as lexical access deficit itself. So it's a lexical activation deficit itself. Right. So now we'll just try to correlate some common symptoms seen in aphasia with failure in lexical access. So when you say paraphasia, it's an unintended word substitution, right? It's like a word replacement or a word substitution is taking place, right? So paraphasia is one of the most common, error which is seen in persons with aphasia. So when it comes to paraphasia, also there are different variants of paraphasia, and you have different based on what relationship the word which is produced by the patient, has with the target word, paraphasia is categorized. So you have different variants like semantic paraphasia, phonemic paraphasia, and random paraphasia. So let's take semantic paraphasia. So in place of dog, if you say cat, it's semantic paraphasia. So, but like when you just compare this with the model of lexical access, the problem would lie in the process of lexical activation. The right lexical node is not activated. So like during the process of lexical computation, so that is the competitor lexical nodes are also activated, I told you, right? So the right lexical nodes, which is matching with the semantic feature, is not represented. So it like there is one more lexical node which is activated. So because of this, it can lead to semantic paraphasia. So I can call semantic paraphasia as an error in lexical activation, right? So when you say phonemic paraphasia, yeah, can I continue?
Yeah, go ahead, Abhishek, please.
Yeah. When you say phonemic paraphasia, it's like like if you say can instead of cat, it's like the word which is produced by the patient has a phonemic relationship with the target word, right? So that's called as phonemic paraphasia. Where could the error lie? The error could lie in the phoneme retrieval process. The right phonemes are not derived from your phonological output lexicon. So when you say you have something called phonological output lexicon, which houses the phonemes in its raw form. So these phonemes have to be picked and it has to be aligned properly to produce a meaningful word, right? So when you say phonemic paraphasia, you can say that phonemic paraphasia is an error in the phoneme retrieval. So similarly, you have something called as random paraphasia, where where the response what the client is producing is entirely different from that of the target one. So this is where you can say that mapping between the conceptual features and the lexical node or lemma node is not taking place properly, owing to which you have a random paraphasia. So instead of cat or dog, the client is just producing stone or green. So that means to say that the response what the client is producing is entirely distinct and has no relationship with the target one. So why is this happening? There is no mapping taking place between your conceptual features and the target one. So because of this, random paraphasia is happening. So thus you can correlate the different types of paraphasias to deficiencies in different steps in lexical access. So next, if you go to one more common linguistic symptom which is seen in persons with aphasia, perseveration. So what do you mean by perseveration? Is it's the repetition of the previous response. So you keep on repeating. So again, there are different types of perseveration. You have random and continuous. Random is like for one or two stimulus, you just repeat the same thing and then you go ahead. Continuous is like for example, if I'm carrying out a confrontation naming test, so I show a particular picture and then I move on to the next picture. But still the client is producing the for example, if the first picture is of that of a car and second picture is that of a parrot, the client just says car, car, car. So that means to say that there is no inhibition taking place. So what should happen is as soon as a particular item is labeled, so you have to inhibit the response. You have to stop at that particular point and then you'll have to move to the next. So because that inhibition is not taking place, it can result in an error like perseveration. Right. So similarly, you have circumlocution, which is usually seen in persons with anomic type of aphasia. So circumlocution, most of you would be knowing, is like beating around the bush, right? So that means to say that suppose I ask you something, so you can describe everything related to that particular picture, except that you're not able to come up with the label, linguistic label. That means to say that the mapping between the conceptual or semantic features is intact, but the mapping is not taking place in the right way, owing to which you have circumlocution. So it is usually seen in persons with fluent aphasia, especially in anomic aphasia. So circumlocution is beating around the bush and the problem could lie in the process of mapping. right? So this is how you can correlate the most common symptoms seen in persons with aphasia, that is paraphasia, perseveration, and circumlocution, and how you can attribute this to lexical access failure. So in the next part of this slide, I'll be introducing you to the concept of storage deficit and access deficit. So storage deficit and access deficit. Now let's try to, take a simple analogy. Suppose I go to a shop, right? I want to buy things. Suppose my wallet is not filled with money, I'll not be able to buy that particular thing. This is one condition. Suppose I go to the shop, I want to buy something, so which is worth 30 rupees, but I just have a 2000 rupees note, and like the shopkeeper has no change, and I don't have anything like Google Pay or Phone Pay, or I don't have my phone. So even though I have a note, I'll not be able to exchange it with the product which I want, right? So these are the two analogies. Now let's take these two analogies and try to understand what is a storage deficit and access deficit. So when you say storage deficit, that's where there is total degradation of the items in the semantic store. That is, the items in the semantic store itself is lost, or the conceptual semantic activation itself is not taking place. But please note that this may not occur in persons with aphasia. It may occur in conditions like semantic dementia, where the words itself gets impoverished. So if you take even primary progressive aphasia also, for that matter, you have again different variants of primary progressive aphasia, but I'm speaking in general. So the words gets lost, right? So like it's just like a condition where you have an empty purse. So since you do not have money, you cannot purchase an item. Similarly, since you do not have the word in your vocabulary, you will not be able to come out with what the target word is. So, but usually in persons with aphasia, they will have access deficit. So, however severe the type of aphasia is, and semantic storage deficit can be seen in case of degenerative conditions like semantic dementia, and sometimes in case of PPI they say, but PPA they say. But it's mostly the access deficit which is seen in case of persons with aphasia. And this particular slide tells you about storage deficit. As the semantic system is central to all the meaningful language processing, so you can when this semantic activation is not taking place in the right way, it can lead to a storage deficit. So, but how do you identify a storage deficit? So if you administer any test which gives you semantic comprehension scores, and if the semantic comprehension score is poor, that's how you can identify a storage deficit in clinical situation. But there are other cues also. For example, if you take a person with storage deficit and access deficit, and you give him cues. So a person with access deficit will do well with cues. So as soon as you give a cue, be it semantic or phonemic cue, the participant will be able to recollect what the word is, or the person will be able to give you the linguistic label as soon as you give cues. But that doesn't happen with the person with storage deficit. Regardless of the cues which you give, the person will not be able to come up with what the word is. Are you getting my point? So that means to say that, so there are other measures also which can tell you whether it's a storage deficit or an access deficit. And one more thing is, a person with storage deficit will exhibit consistent errors. The person, usually it will be no response kind of errors, which is seen in case of storage deficit. And when it comes to a person with access deficit, he can produce a paraphrasic response and all that. But that's again a factor which would differentiate the two, right? So, and person with access deficit also would be very the kind of responses would fluctuate. So sometimes they'll be able to retrieve the word, sometimes they may not be able to retrieve the word. All these things can happen. But whereas when it comes to storage deficit, they give you no responses most of the time. So there are ways in which you can differentiate a storage deficit and access deficit. So due to the time constraint, I've just left it here. That means to say that I've not put ways, but there are ways. You can refer to Gainotti and Butterworth's article. So it tells you how you can differentiate storage and access deficit. I can share the link after my presentation if you want. And I told you that in persons with aphasia, it's most probably an access deficit. That means to say that either lexical activation is not taking place or they're not able to retrieve the right word. So because of this, they're exhibiting an access deficit. So this is seen in case of persons with aphasia, right? So if you can see the slide here, I told you that you have concept, you have lexical semantic level and phonological, output level here. So when there is problem with respect to your semantic features, when semantic features are not activated, when the then it can result in storage deficits when you do not have sufficient items in your lexicon. So that can result in a storage deficit, whereas an access deficit can be a resultant of two things. That is, the connection between the semantic features and your lexical network gets impeded, or the mapping between the lexical network and your phoneme retrieval is getting affected. So these two levels, these are the two levels of access deficit, and this particular slide would help you to know what is a storage deficit and access deficit. So in a storage deficit, there is problem in semantic activation. In access deficit, there are two possibilities. One is the mapping between the concepts or the semantic features and the lemma nodes may get affected, or the mapping between the lemma nodes and its phonemic representations may get affected. So these are the two possibilities. Of course, there are different levels when it comes to phonological output processing also. For example, if you take a person with Broca's aphasia, the person may not be able to give you the right verbal output because of the articulation problems or because of the expression problems. Yes, so that also can be one of the possibilities when it comes to retrieval deficits. But I'm speaking about the two levels of access deficits here, but I've just got it to your attention that beyond this there could be problems which is resulting in naming, poor performance on naming. Okay, apart from this, there is a term used called as transmission deficit. Okay, so this there was a study which was as early as 1990. This was a study which was done by Milberg and Bloomstein. So what they did is they did a task called as 5 seconds naming task. So the participant was asked to name the stimulus in 5 seconds. Okay, so when you gave just 5 seconds, what happened is the participants could just obtain a score of 30% or 35%. So then what they did is they gave a grace time. What do you mean by grace time? Is they gave around 30 seconds. Sorry, they gave around 5 seconds to 30 seconds, based on whether there is a response elicited or not, and they just saw whether the person is able to activate the target. Many a times, participants who are attending therapy, especially, they were able to self-cue. That means to say that when you give additional grace time, they were able to come up with the label, and their performance was up to 50 to 60% when you gave them the additional grace time. So that's where the concept of transmission deficit came up. So they say that there is a delayed lexical activation when it comes to certain variants of aphasia like Broca's, Wernicke's, and even anomic. So if you give more time for the participant to respond, the person may come up with the responses. Many a times they may be able to come up with a spontaneous response. That means to say that they may self-cue the response and they may come up. So in such cases, the term transmission deficit is used. That is, lexical activation is delayed, because of the aphasic component. Of course, if you give additional time for the participant to, come up with the label, they may be able to come up with the label, and this is called as transmission deficit. Right. So first, I've told you about storage deficit, where there is actual degradation of the lexical items. And then I've told you regarding the access deficit. Yeah, I've told you regarding the access deficit, and I've told you regarding the two stages of access deficit. That is problems with respect to lexical activation or problems with respect to phonemic access. Then I've told you something related to transmission deficit, right? So yeah. Now let's take one more. First, what we try to do in persons with aphasia is we try to correlate the symptoms which is seen in persons with aphasia with, like failure in lexical access. Next, I told you about storage and, storage deficit and access deficit. So a third concept, which I would like to cover within this short presentation, is about cuing, right? So when you say cues, there are prompts, so which helps persons with access deficit to come up with what the word is. So if you give a cue, the person will be able to come out with the target word. That's the basic thing. So again, when you give cues, there are different types of cues, right? So you can give a semantic cue or you can give a phonemic cue. When you say semantic cue, again, there are different types of semantic cues. Like for example, you can name the lexical category itself. You can say that it's an animal, or you can say that it's a domestic animal. That is the supraordinate category can be given, or you can say one more word belonging to the same lexical category, which is called as a category associate, or you can give a feature associated with that particular word. So there are multiple ways in which you can implement a semantic cue. Okay, but when you say semantic cue, what you're trying to do is you're trying to specify the lexical category, or you're trying to give a lexical item belonging to the same belonging to the same lexical category, or you're trying to give a feature associated with that particular target item. So you're trying to strengthen the semantic network, and you're trying to facilitate the process of lexical activation, and you're making the participant come out with the target item. So when you say phonemic cue, it's like you give a particular phoneme, usually the first consonant, you just give the first consonant associated with the schwa vowel as a cue, and you will help the participant to come out with, come out with the target. So this is where a phonemic cue works. So like semantic cues, where you're trying to give the semantic features. Phonemic cues, like you're giving the first consonant or a phoneme first consonant with schwa vowel in order to make the participant come out with the target item, right? So this is the difference between semantic cues and phonemic cues. And it is difficult to say which patient benefits with what. So you'll have to experimentally see how they perform in the naming task, what kind of responses they produce, whether they're producing semantic paraphasic or phonemic paraphasic response. And then you may also as soon as you see a patient and as soon as you give therapy, for a while, you'll get to know which type of cue is working best with patients, right? But whether it is able to generalize, saying that semantic cue is better than phonemic cue, or phonemic cue is better than semantic cue, if you see, the literature gives you mixed findings. Okay, so if you see the articles by Nichols and Harvard, Craig and Ellis, they say that semantic cue is the best. If you give semantic cue, the participant will be able to come with, but it's negated by some recent studies. One which is put in the slide there, done by Arpita Bose and Metiad in 2017. What they say is, even the assumption is that phonemic cue is given at the last stage and it cannot trigger the semantic features. That may not happen, is what this researchers say. They say that even if you give phonemic cues also, so even though it's a more peripheral cue, so it will help you in the process of lexical activation. So that also may be robust, is what they say. So you'll have to conduct more studies to say that semantic cues are best or phonemic cues are best. But it's more to do with it's more to do with the patient. It's more to do with the kind of responses what the participant is producing, and based on that, if you give cues, the cues would work better. And of course, there are some experimental tasks also which is done in this regard. So they've carried out semantic judgment, phonemic judgment. They have seen where the loci of semantic deficit is, whether it's more at the lexical activation stage or whether it's more at the phoneme retrieval stage. So based on where the deficit would lie, if you give a cue, it would help to remediate that type of lexical access thing. And there are experimental tasks which are done in this regard, but still it's more research has to be done in this regard to check the efficacy. But it means to say that it is more of patient specific. So it depends on the patient on which type of cues it would benefit the patient. But you'll definitely be able to figure out this in the initial stages of therapy itself. Okay, so yeah, so this is about my presentation. So I think I took 40 minutes. So in this presentation, what I've covered is I've told you about what is lexical access. I've told you about the models of lexical access. I've explained the different steps or substrates of lexical access. Then coming to, the tasks of lexical access, I've told you what all tasks can be used to assess lexical access. I've told you briefly about inhibition and facilitation. And later, I've told you about, I've spoken on lexical access in persons with aphasia in regard to the symptoms, in regard to, in regard to the symptoms, like paraphasia, perseveration, circumlocution, etc. Then I've told you storage and access deficit, as well as what is transmission deficit. And I've briefly spoken on the cues also. Gopee sir, there any questions?
Yeah, thank you, Abhishek, for that wonderful and quick and short rundown on the lexical access and storage deficits in aphasia. Quite happy that it's kind of a rapid revision of all that what we studied some years ago. Anyways, now in fact I saw one. Krupa Solanki had requested you, can you please explain storage deficits in L1 and L2 in a hypothetical case of SD? SD shall be obviously storage deficit. Now, I don't know whether it is semantic dementia or storage deficit. I'm not sure. Krupa,
I
can
thought
you
it's
just
semantic dementia. Yeah.
No, let's ask her. Krupa,
yes.
Can you just unmute yourself and clarify what is that SD?
Yes, sir, it's semantic dementia.
Semantic dementia.
Yes.
Yeah, that's semantic dementia. Yeah, go ahead, Abhishek.
Yes. So in fact, I had few slides which is put on bilinguals because how lexical activation takes place in bilinguals is again enzima. There are multiple views regarding this. So at least now they say that there is a common store for your L1 and L2. There is a common store and there is one more hypothesis which speaks about a discrete store for L1 and L2. But through research, it's been proven that at least for some of the words, because all of us use borrowed words and all that. So because of that, there is a shared representation is what they say. So now considering your question, you are asking about L1 and L2 in terms of, in case of semantic dementia. Usually what happens is there is something called as interlocutor, which tells you, suppose you ask me, you ask me what is the time. Now I have to tell you the time, whether I tell it in my L2 or L1. So it's based on many things, it's based on usage, it's based on my proficiency, everything. But now, how the interlocutor works, how the interlocutor chooses that I have to give you a response in L1 or whether I have to give you a response in L2. That's, purely based on many factors and, within the individual. Now, coming back to the question. So since the person has semantic dementia, both words in L1 as well as L2 gets impoverished. So, it's like many a times what may happen is they may choose, there is something called as convenience principle that is based, if you're not getting the word in that particular language, suppose we are speaking in a language, you're not getting the word, what you do is you tend to see, if you get the word in the other language, you tend to use, right? So same way a person with, a person with semantic dementia also may just try to give a word in the language which he knows, but ultimately what happens since it's a degenerative condition is there is storage deficit regardless of whether you say L1 or L2. In both the conditions, the person will have storage deficit. Because of that, he'll not be able to come up with the right word, resulting in a communication breakdown.
Okay, sir, and I had one more question. So this is, I don't know, slightly off topic or something, but what about the languages which have bihemispheric representation? So in such cases, how will there be such deficits occurring? Like, for example, Bengali has bilateral hemispheric representation, where I had read up a study which said that they had patients with aphasia, but none of them were having Wernicke's types of aphasia. So, sir, what is your take on that?
Yeah, it varies with respect to the languages. For example, if I take two languages which has cognates, which has common words, so how is lexical activation taking place? So if you see, or if you just speak about the languages which may have a vivid representation, as you said, so I think the answer is through research studies itself. The ease of processing or difficulty is decided by the language which you speak. So it would be difficult to generalize or give you a specific answer to say that, so this is how it is. So it depends on the language. It depends on how the representation of the language is in the brain. And, for example, if you're speaking about some languages like Mandarin, etc., where the phonemic variation itself can bring in difference and all that. So, it purely depends on the language, and through the research studies itself, we'll be able to address this. And I think we'll have to refer to studies which speaks about access deficit in a given language to respond. And it's difficult to generalize or give a statement saying that this is how it can occur.
Correct. Thank you so much.
Gopee, this is Anima here. Can I just add a point to what was being discussed?
Yeah, quickly, ma'am. We have another question. Yeah, go ahead, please. Yep.
Yeah. Like, for example, the question that she was asking was L1 and L2 difference, right? So it's important that you cannot just look at a single category or so and say that, because we know that in semantic dementia, any kind of many categories can be impaired. So which is the category that is impaired and which is not impaired, you have to run the battery. So the importance of running a semantic battery is so important in the PPAs. It's only with that you will be able to differentiate, and you will be able to correctly identify what is the differences in L1 and L2 and what are the categories that are impaired. That's what I want to add.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am. If I can add a point here, ma'am. Actually, like you were speaking about this category-specific semantic deficits, which could be seen in case of persons with semantic dementia. So there is it's totally right, ma'am, because based on the semantic category which you are speaking, the deficits could vary, and there is a lot of studies done by Warrington and Chalet in this regard. So which speaks about this, and they say that it has to be assessed with respect to each of the semantic category, to deduce how the access deficit or how, the linguistic deficits in persons with semantic dementia occur.
Yeah, I hope that answers the question or the questions of Mrs. Krupa. And we yet have another question here. In fact, we have two. A misnomer. I would say, the person's identity is not revealed. But let me come to the question: is lexical access deficit seen in other disorders other than adult language disorders?
You can see wherever naming deficits are seen, you can attribute the naming deficits to lexical access. Suppose you're speaking about a few conditions like specific language impairment or something like that, so where the person is not able to map between the semantic features and the thing, you can have errors also. Since the naming deficits are most commonly seen in case of adult language disorders, you can attribute it to lexical access. So lexical access is more like a phenomenon rather than, saying that this is where the deficit is occurring. And, based on what kind of response the participant is producing and based on what kind of difficulties they exhibit, you can just generalize saying that, there is a failure of lexical access occurring or not.
I hope that answers the question. And if that's the case, then we have yet another question. How does lexical access fit into word reading letter by letter? Okay. By Dr. Dharmaka Santosh.
Okay. Again, when it comes to the relationship between lexical access and, in lexical access, I spoke about phoneme retrieval, and in reading, it's more like orthographic retrieval, which is happening. So there are models which tends to, correlate the phonemic access with that of the orthographic access. Like, for example, if you take the dual root activation model, so that again, gives you an thing. So lexical, if the person is suppose a person is reading, the person has to decode the phonemes, the person has to identify what it is, and then the person has to read it. So if that's the case, if that if that particular mapping between the orthographic features and phonological output lexicon, if that root is cut, if that root is cut, again they can exhibit problems with respect to reading also. Santosh, I hope that answers your question.
I hope so. Yes, I think he says thank you. Yeah. And one common announcement. I've been getting some queries like are we recording the sessions? Sonal, we are recording the session, right? Yes, we are, in fact.
Yeah,
yes.
The session is recorded.
Yeah, so don't worry about it.
Session
yes,
will be recorded. Yes,
and you will have access to that. Yes,
YouTube also, so it will be helpful for all the people who might have missed the session.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So be happy about it. Okay. Even if you just miss a bit bit here and there, don't worry about it. Sonal is there to help you. And we now have another question, yet another question, that is, could you please discuss few treatment strategies to work on storage deficits in PPA?
So as far as PPA is concerned, it's a degenerative condition again. So there are two types of strategies which they follow in case of PPA, to the best of my knowledge. So you have something called as futuristic, futuristic strategies, where you're trying to teach things which may help the participant, like the usage of EAC also can be, can be considered as one of the things which come under the futuristic approach. So, and you have something like the deficit-based approach, where you say, like, based on what kind of deficits they have, you tend to work on that particular thing. Now, since the question is on storage deficits in persons with aphasia, even though, you can halt the process or you can slow down the progression, I assume, but you may not have, and you may have techniques to strengthen the semantic network also at times, but you may not arrest the degeneration, or you may not stop the degeneration from happening. So even though you teach the words, there are chances that the words may get impoverished after the due course of time. So based on what kind of strategy you follow, whether the futuristic or the deficit based strategy, you'll have to go ahead. But that's the question for Ms. Meera Shah's. That's the answer for Meera Shah's question.
Also, I would like to add to that. Yes, very importantly, progressive aphasia has not been well investigated, addressed in majority of countries and nations, and especially in Indian scenario. They come to us when they are frank FTDs or ADs or degenerative processes. So progressive aphasias, if they are tapped in an early stage where they have a frank and an early onset, it would be helpful for SLP, and we play major essential role. So one should understand that there could be so many good strategies which you all have been learning, exploring, and even remediating and retraining or rehabilitating many children with learning language learning disorders. However, with degenerative disorders, one just cannot reverse the process. So you have to work on amalgamating it with familiarity, with their music, with their art, with their occupation and the likes. And as soon that once you work on the person as a whole and the communication as a mainstay, so you have to work with terms of semantics and with the vast cultural aspects of India. I think you can make a wonderful therapy material, helping the person communicate with a lexicon related to everyday setting, with the person's month to years and the long-term memories, and that could be really helpful in a person with PPA. If it is a semantic dementia, yes, the semantics are degraded. If it is a person with progressive non-fluent aphasia, they do have preserved semantics in terms of comprehension up to some limit, and later it also gets degraded or it gets attrition. And if it's logopenic aphasia, logopenic PPA, then the Alzheimer's component, the associated Alzheimer's pathology, tau pathology, may not give you great results with your semantic feature analysis. But yes, with the visual, verbal, tactile, a multimodality sensory approach, cognitive-based therapy, where you could go for a sensory and space retrieval training. It could help you preserve and delay the communicative aspects of lexicon up to some limit, and later, importantly, how you can still preserve and help someone communicate effectively. You might check Maya Henry's recent work and the Nicole Lindsay's recent work on PPA related interventions or ICF based strategies. I'm really happy with the engaging audience who was there with us.
Now we still have questions, Sonal.
Oh, it's
And
7.
Dr.
So can we
Goswami
have some 2 questions quickly?
Yeah, see, he has, Dr. Goswami has added on to that, like language oriented treatment could be one such approach which could be used. Okay. And then we have yet another question. Thanks for that input, sir. And then we still have one more question. How does lexical access impact acquired writing when storage is present but access is impaired, especially considering the challenges in this task? Especially that's a very valid question.
Again, when it comes to the relationship, like between lexical access and how the output is expressed in terms of the written output. So there are not many studies as far as I know, but there is one study which is done by Warren, probably in 1988. So what that study tells you is like they had like they had 3 or 4 experimental tasks, I assume. So in one of the tasks, they it required them to write, to write the response. So in case of access deficits also, when they are not able to come out with the linguistic label, when they were asked to name, so they were performing better compared to, Conan attributes it to us, like when it comes to written word, the organization, and again, I'm not sure of what was the time which was given for the whether it was same for the oral naming as well as written naming, but written naming task was the performance of written naming task was much better. So that's how he says that the organization of the content would be better when it comes to this. Again, if you take a person with Broca's aphasia, the person will not be able to give you the right response because of the production deficits what he has. But suppose he will have right hemiparesis or hemiparaplegia. Because of that, the writing could be affected, but still the person will be able to give you the linguistic label. So that means to say that, so because in cases where they're not able to retrieve the correct word because of the production deficits, they may be performing better on written tasks. So it again depends on how you express, but the same challenges as you see in case of lexical activation can be seen in case of written content also, but few variants of aphasia may do well with this modality.
I hope that
you would like to add something on that. Is Annama ma'am there?
Yeah, Sonal?
Would you like to add to that with your expertise?
No, I have nothing to say. I'm not adding anything to what Abhishek has said now. Just go ahead.
Okay,
yeah. Actually, in fact, just some snippets from my memory. In fact, see, written naming is actually a challenging task, and even I have seen patients struggling with getting the names of the common entities and also category specific entities. A bit even in monolinguals as well as in bilinguals. In fact, see, as I think rightly I asked by Dr. Santosh, because it's already stored, because we acquire our written language much later, almost after we nearly complete our spoken language mastery. And then we are introduced to the written language. So we have the concepts and talking in terms of as what happens in a typical developmental profile. So then we are introduced to the written languages, written language symbols. And then we are using those symbols to represent the concepts that are only available to our available in our storage. This one, and you can actually find, if you many a times clinically, I work in an acute care hospital, so nothing of that sort most of the time works, because they are like, you know, soon after they get a stroke, they are brought here, so they wouldn't carry their specs while coming to catching an ambulance. So we have practical issues of that sort. But what I have seen in my experience is that they have actually a very fascinating type of, like, you know, dissociations in the written language processing, both in terms of input processing as well as output processing. 2 weeks back or 3 weeks back, there was one lady, 43-year-old lady, who was actually a BCom, a degree holder, who had specific difficulties in getting, this is not written but spoken, getting the number names in Kannada, whereas she's quite fluent, she's quite happy, she can manage that with the English letter in English. And again, we could not actually probe into her writing aspect of it because of her general medical condition. But even in our earlier cases, I have noticed, like, they have quite a lot of, like, a very interesting and fascinating type of dissociations. And I strongly believe that there are 2-3 things. One, as I mentioned, that because the written language is introduced at a later age compared to spoken language, so we only have the concepts within it, and we are just putting a different annotation to those concepts in the form of written languages. And next one is that, like, you know, the way we learn our languages. For example, see the English language, and I have observed that patients, after even young stroke persons, they are able to better retrieve or recover in English language compared to Kannada language. This appears to be paradoxical, but I have my justification for that, though it's an kind of my own this one, because the way we actually do a kind of rote learning of most of our Indian orthography. For example, if you first learn say the characters, for example, syllables, the vowels and consonants, and then the diacritic markers, then it's just like, you know, adding into the slot. You can master it easily. But actually, that does not happen with English. So the way we actually invest a lot on acquiring the pronunciation in English, unlike in most Indian orthographies. And perhaps that could be one reason why what I am expecting, that, like, you know, many times people experience a lot more difficulties in recovering in their, especially the written language skills in Indian languages. In my experience, like, is in Kannada compared to English. English, they are somehow able to manage with the training, but Kannada, as I see experience here, like, you know, they struggle a lot. So anyway, to answer, to come back to conclude, see, the written language is entirely, you know, a kind of, like, you know, mystery. I can say that because of very many reasons. We master it later. Our orthography is different, and we'll invest less on our mastery of our written language compared to, say, the foreign language such as English. So due to all these reasons, perhaps, like, this kind of odd circumstances that we encounter in the clinical practice. Anyways, over to you, Abhishek, if you have anything to add more on it.
No, sir, that was a useful insight, in fact, like, and that's again something which I've seen, especially when it comes to English writing and Kannada writing, was what you were saying. So, despite the proficiency when it comes to writing, they would prefer to write in, English compared to Kannada. So those variations I've also seen. So as you said, it's a complex system on its own. So, you'll have to, get into the details to understand where the breakdown is and how to remediate.
All right. So one last question from Meera Shah to you, Dr. Abhishek. So that could that also be because of frequency of using English more rather than regional languages?
It depends on the patients. We cannot generalize, but again, you have this primacy principle, and whether you're which was the language which you use more, which language you were using before the stroke, all those factors would count. And it is difficult to say that to generalize, saying that everyone speaks English more than their native language, but usage would definitely play a role.
Also to that, neural reorganization of your pathways post-stroke matters. If someone who has a kind of a mixed or a balanced cerebral reorganization for language, and the speaking, writing, reading, gestures, pathways across 2 languages or 3 languages are different, they might have a much better spared collateral pathways. So they might have a better English second language or a third language and then a first language, and also official medium, then your usage, someone who has not used or much worked on the reading writing in the first native language also could have actually a better reading writing calculation in the second language. And a brain is real, fascinating, enigmatic. So how they respond to different therapy techniques, therapy approaches, the music, rhythm, and the language is improving, not improving, are also very different factors to be studied in our Indian population. Even illiterates and literates to be called functional literates. So I think, Mira, you have asked very great question and probe to that frequency matters. The low frequency, high frequency, low imageability, concreteness also matters when we target the stimuli, what the person has to name in our oral naming or written naming, and see that how we actually need to understand the multimodality naming and how the person is preserved. And then famous faces naming also is very important. I feel something gets missed in many sort of our naming task. So we do have very great clinical and cultural base reserve in our Indian population, that's called cognitive reserve, and it's very different for different people with the majority of their religion aspects, what they are like they chant, or they will be praying, or they will be writing, or they will be continuously even somewhere making some verses, and as their daily practice they also make a difference to your quick reading writing, and what improves, what does not improve, and what can be improved later. So I really do you have some questions, sir, to be taken?
No, Sonal. Now you can, in fact, quickly wind up and then come to the end of this session. Yeah.
Okay, sir. So, Dr. Gopee Krishnan, I really thank you for being a wonderful moderator. You have really added flavor to the today's lexical access in Aphasiology talk. One of the most important aspects is the lexicon. And Dr. Abhishek, we are fortunate to have you as a speaker today, and you have really made all of us well aware from what we have understood, what we have studied in our undergrad and post-graduation and your clinical practice, about how do we understand, how do we consider the lexical storage access in terms of language and communication in aphasia. And for the young students and practitioner here, we got a very good rich input from you. I thank you from the Indian Speech and Hearing Association, AIISH Clinical Aphasiology. I thank all the participants of this session today who have taken time from the busy schedule and joined us. I thank Dr. Goswami sir, Dr. Anuma ma'am, then Preeti, Pinky, Santosh, Prema, and
Sonal, you can thank all that 42 people, okay?
Yeah, I'm really
yeah,
happy.
because
Those
now some
30
of them
people
have
are...
quit, but thank all of them, yes.
Yeah, can I just quickly share the screen? Is my screen visible?
Yeah. We see SIG Aphasia, June Aphasia Awareness Month. Yeah.
Okay, so stay tuned with us. We will be having many more education series. Our next speaker will be Professor Andrea Marini, a physiologist from Udine, Italy, who would be enlightening all of us on neural correlates on 16th June. And as a
spread the
June
news.
being Aphasia Awareness Month, AIISH Chair Research, Dr. Abhishek, AIISH Chair Promotion Activity, Dr. Noorain, and our EC have planned some good activities. We'd like to have your input on what and how we can make this June Aphasia Awareness Month from the successful one. And we extend your warm welcome to all the young aphasiology clinicians that if you have input, please share with us. We have organized certain competitions and we would announce them soon. So we will have aphasia quiz, collage making, e-poster making, leaflet making, meme or GIF on aphasia, public awareness campaign. We request all the audience here, each one reach one medical and allied health professionals so that they refer the person with aphasia and the caregivers so that they adequately get help, early rehabilitation. Also, make sure that promote speech language pathologist, great contribution in acute care, and the majority of secondary and tertiary centers which we are lacking in Indian scenario, the huge population and burden of aphasia and neurological disorders. So I would here conclude the session today. Thank you so much all. Thanks for joining. Stay tuned with the further programs. I thank once again our speaker, chairs, and all the seniors and audience joining here.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you all. Thank you, Abhishek.
Sir,
Thank you, Sonal.
Thank you,
Thank you all.
Stay safe. Bye-bye.